Nej, det bestämmer inte du. Du är inte min riktiga pappa. Mamma, jag måste gå nu.
Sorry for that. Welcome to Real Fake Guns. I'm Grim, and today we have a special guest, the LC3, or also known as the G3. It's a special episode in collaboration with LCT and Airsoft.nu. I'm not gonna stand around and talk all day, so let's jump on and take a look of the G3. As many of you know, there are plenty of G3s out there, but it's none made out of entirely steel, and the LC3 is made of steel. Many of the other manufacturers claim they are full metal, which they are, but metal also includes like pot metal, magnesium, aluminium, and other crap that just breaks by looking at them. But this one is full steel, the first full steel in Airsoft ever, so that's what all the hype is about. So how does the LC3 feel? Well, the first impression for me is that it's a very solid build. You can almost say it's like a real sword to AK. And if you shake it around, that's my radio. But if you shake it around, there are no bits flapping around and making shitty noises. You really feel this is one solid piece. So what's my plan with this very long, cool rifle? Well, as you can see, I'm dressed as the Swedish military during the Cold War, and that's the era they used the regular AK4. This will fit perfectly for a Swedish AK4. Today they have AK4B, which have cut sights and added a Picatinny rail and a dot sight. But I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna focus on the very classic gun. But I really hope to see some of you out there to make a AK4B, because this will fit perfectly. Just weld a Picatinny rail up there, just like you would have done with a real one. The AK4 is based off the G3 and was brought in use in 1964 in Sweden. It was made by Husqvarna Vapenfabrik and Carl Gustav Stads Gevärsfaktori. Oh man, check out that warface! It was used about to the late 80s, where it was replaced by the AK5. It's still in use today, but in the version as AK4B, as I mentioned earlier. Let's check out the real parts that I've got. So here's all the real parts I'm going to use, and as you can see, it's almost a complete rifle. These parts are all license-free here in Sweden, and yes, even the lower full auto is license-free. Well, for the time being, that is. The only parts that are not legal to have from a real rifle is the upper receiver, barrel and bolt. But everything else you can own license-free. And I often get the question where I buy all my real parts. Well, my main go-to place is Civ Militaria in Germany. Most you see here is bought from there. The lower is about like 50-60 euros, so set with stock and grip is about the same price. But some parts that's typical for the AK4 are the brass collector, or elefantpung as it's called in Sweden, which means an elephant's ball sack, which is kind of similar to. And it's the brass deflector. These two parts are not in use anymore in the Swedish army, since they use AK4B. They don't have this part, and this brass collector is another model that fits the AK4B. And for the sticker, that's very typical for Swedish AK4. It's actually upside down, and that's because you're gonna be able to read it when you're holding the rifle from this position. It's to adjust your rear sight. This sticker is not in use anymore on the AK4B, but on the old regular AK4, it's a very classic sticker. This one is real, and they are very hard to get, but there's a guy doing reproductions of this. I have his email address in the description, so check it out and give him an email. They're about 2 euros or something. My intentions are to make all of this to fit the LC3. However, I will probably make this episode in 2 parts. And the first part will focus on parts that are basically drop-in fit or light modifications to fit. And the second part will focus on more heavy modifications, like the lower will probably need some heavy modifications. But I'm still pretty sure this will fit, since it's wide enough to take a B2 gearbox, and if you take out the fire control group, you can see it's good enough space in there. So that will be a fun project to do. And now you're probably wondering which of the real parts are drop-in fit. First of all, the handguard is drop-in fit. Here is the real one, and here's the, as you can see, LC3 handguard. The main difference between these two are that the real one is more glossy in its finish and the LCT is more matte. And also this texture here is a lot smaller than the LCT, which is bigger. And in the real handguard you also have a heat shield that the LCT don't have, for most airsoft that is. So to get this one onto here, I first have to take out this pin just by pushing it. In the beginning it may be a bit stiff, but after a while it's get easier to remove. And then you pull down like this, and then add the real handguard just by inserting it, just like with the old handguard, and take the pin and push it in from this side. The reason why I push these pins from this side is because if you had this side against your body, after a while you would push it out and it might fall off. And that's it to get a real handguard to fit the LC3. No modifications at all, drop-in fit. And now for the rear sight. Here's the sight on the LC3. The difference between this real part is that it's highlighted with numbers when you turn around, which is a very classic look of the AK4. So to get this part onto here, you first need to take out this screw right here. And for that I'm using a flat head screwdriver. And after you remove the screw, just pull it out. The difference between the real one is that it uses a spring inside, and for small parts I would keep them in a container. I use this magic apple, and here's the very small spring, and this spring goes into here as a resistance when you turn the cylinder around. So that's something you need to make sure doesn't fall off when installing it. So put it in and hold the rifle kind of upside down and press it down. And when you have it like that, you take up this part and put it in here like that, and this washer, so make sure that the screw won't pop off. And here's the real screw, and to install it I'm actually going to use the real AK4 screwdriver meant to adjust this rear sight. So that's kind of a neat thing. This is not a screwdriver you need to install it, it's just for fun. And that's it. It's installed, ready to go. Sometimes you need to loosen this or tighten this as for when you install it. So just make sure that doesn't pop out. And that's it. Now it's installed and ready to go. So next up is the brass deflector. It's kind of hard to push it on, but you put it about here and just press it. Ah, yeah, there it is. It sits super tight. And this is a very classic part for the AK4. So if you're doing an AK4 build and don't have the brass catcher, for example, that doesn't matter so much since the brass catcher was mostly used during training. But this one was always on the AK4. So onto the elefantpung or brass catcher. It's really not rocket science to install this, but just to make sure I'm gonna take a look in my materielbok. Here it is. So looks like you have to put it on top and then bend it down and fold it in. So let's try that. Okay, so put it on top and bend it down. Yeah, that seems right so far. And just pull it in. Perfect fit. And as you can see here, it's cut out, so it's intended to use with the brass deflector. Another neat feature about this Elephant Pung is that if you open the bolt carrier, you can actually pull out the wires here and add a super huge battery in here and connect them together, and when you close it, the battery won't be seen. This is a very good option because in a real stock there only fits a very small type of battery. And speaking of the real stock, I still have the LCT stock on. So let's get around and take a look of the real stock. Now it's time to add the real stock. So to add this onto here, you first need to take out these two pins. And you do that just by pressing them down. They can be a bit stiff in the beginning, so you might need a screwdriver to help push them out like that and that. To secure the pins so you don't lose them, you place them here. And that's why these holes really are here. It's to keep these in place, just like on the real gum. And then you need to pull the stock out, but the LCT is very solid build, as I said, so you need to bang this a bit and push it out. And there the stock is off. We need to open up here, and to do that we need to lose 2 screws here. Make sure you don't lose these 2 washers because they're very small and hard to see. And then you need to open the butt plate. This sits extremely hard. On the LCT it's a lot easier, just pull it out like this. And the thing is pretty much the same on the real one, except a lot harder. You push it to the side like that, and then you can remove it. And here's what's it look. It's way stronger. And here you can see the small battery I've already put inside. This is the type I use, which goes up here. The reason is because the room in a real stock is smaller. As you can see here, this part goes inside of the stock, blocking a lot of space, while on an airsoft one or the LCT it goes on the outside. So if you really want to use a big battery in a stock like this, use the standard one. But if you hardcore like me and care more about the looks than what is practical, this is the step you can use. I use a small 7.4 LiPo battery, but this is just a random one I chose, and it fit kind of perfect in there, so I didn't bother to check any other solutions. But probably if you're creative, you can have different setup in here. Oh, and yeah, the same goes for the stocks. The LCT is more matte and the real one is a lot glossier, as you can see. So this will give a much better AK4 look. And after you loosen the 2 screws here, you need to loosen another one here. You need a long flathead screwdriver to loosen it, since it's way in here. And that's it. And now this part will fall out here. And here's the screw. And now we can start pulling this apart. This part sits very tight, but just bang it like this. And as you can see, it starts opening up. Goes with a bang. And now you have it open. Sadly, this part don't fit the upper receiver. The upper receiver is too big, seeing as it's hold a V2 gearbox. Not much to cry about, since we just gonna put this part onto here instead. And LCT had made it very simple to put the real stock onto this part. You just loosen these 2 screws and add the real one. And that's what we're gonna do now. This yellow part here is in the way. It's hard to pull out, so I'm gonna try to drill the hole bigger so we can take the cords through it. Well, I'm no brain surgeon, luckily, but this will probably do it. The important thing is that the cord can reach through the hole, so let's try it. And it does. Here it's through. So let's install this onto the LCT stock. So here's the LCT stock. So to remove it, you need to use a Allen key, or also as they know as a hex screw. They sit very tight. There. Here you go. And here it is. only downside to this one aesthetically is that it have this dimple, which the real one does not have. It's smooth. To get it on here, you need to remove some materials here. And to be positive where I should remove it, I add some paint. And now you're probably wondering why I'm doing that. And that's because when the paint is dry and I push this onto here, I can see where the paint gets scratched off. And that's where it's too tight and I need to remove some materials. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so I've just stood around for a while smelling my own farts, and now the paint is dry. Let's see. As you can see, it looks a lot like I need to remove materials here. I'd say a bit on the top as well. I will start with the sides and see what it goes from there. Since I have no patience at all, I'm going to use a Dremel as always.
New things to goggles.
I got this far, so it looks like I have some on the top too. So here's what it looks like after I'm done. You see, it's a lot of rough jobs, but you can be as rough as you want as long as it gets the job done and it's not seen on the outside. Now I'm going to push it on, and as you can see, it's an extremely tight fit, and that's always good. It's so tight I even need a hammer to get the last bit on. And there you have it at last. Just make sure you don't bend the corners when you're bashing a hammer. I'd recommend like a rubber hammer or something like that. And now it's time to add the screws so it won't pop off. For that I'm using the old real screws. They are longer and I always like to use as much real stuff that I possibly can. And don't forget to use the washers. And there it is. Now it's time to mount this on the gun. And instead of the airsoft pins, I'm gonna use the real ones. As I said many times, it's a very solid build, so sometimes you need a hammer. And then it's time for the butt plate. Just make sure you don't squeeze any wires when you put it on. And this uses a very strong spring, so you need to add some force to it. And here it is, the real stock onto the LC3. And already now it looks like a real AK4. The Muzzle Break. Here's the real one. The airsoft one you can screw it on and off, but the real one is too big in its threads, so it doesn't reach it. But as you can see here, there's a spring inside of this that reaches onto here. So if you just push it down or beat it down, as you have to do since it's so hard, as you can see here, it reaches onto this part. There it is. And this spring is so hard that this will not fall off your barrel. Even if I push it with my hands, it sits super tight. So that's pretty much what I call a drop-in fit, even though it doesn't threads on, but this will sit here very strong and it doesn't point up or down. It sits very solid and accurate. So that's all you have to do to fit the real Muzzle Break. It's brand new, which makes it all black and boring. I want to have a used and old look like the old AK4s, so that's what I'm going to do now. Give it a little weathering job so it looks more old and vintage. So when I'm usually weathering my guns, I often start out with randomly put some dings on it with random objects, and it will look natural. The magwell is a typical area that get a lot of dings from inserting the magazines. And the inside also a typical area that gets worn a lot since you rub it on your body for years and years and years. And then you use sandpaper, very fine sandpaper. Try not to make it too low gritty. You need a lot of grit so it's very fine and smooth, because if you have too low grit you will just end up scratching your rifle. And don't press too hard, just let it flow easily like this. And here's a very typical spot where you would rest your finger, so this part will get a lot of use in time. And the magwell is also a typical spot where a lot of use is done, and often rest your hand at this place. Fire selector as well, it points out very much. This will have to get a lot of weathering. It's important to focus on sharp edges like this. You make them pop out and you get a contrast, very typical for the real gun to have. And along these sides, as you can see, these are starting to pop out a bit more. And you just leave the dimples alone so they are dark and black, and you get that nice contrast going on with your rifle. This might sound silly, but I use acrylic marker and just put some paint down there, and while it's wet I rub it around, and some tints of brown is always nice as well. It might not look so much in the camera right now, but it will definitely have an effect on your gun when you look at it later. And that's all we had for today for the video 1, which main focus was dropping parts and light modification parts. Next time I'm going to focus on the more heavy modification parts, getting the reel lower to fit, for example, on the LC3. And don't forget to watch the standalone video with converting real magazines to the LC3 airsoft rifle. As you may remember, here's what the LC3 looked like out of the box when it was new, and here's what it looks like now.